Cannonball is coming to Marvel Snap, but the real question is, will he come in like a wrecking ball or more like a cotton ball? Welcome in, folks. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming, and we're going to take a look here at the newest card coming to Marvel Snap, Cannonball. He is a little bit on the controversial side, but not for necessarily the reasons you're thinking. So let's just dive right into it. And if you like these card breakdowns as we head into the new cards every single week here on the channel, make sure you smash that like and subscribe button down below. Let's go take a look at Cannonball, who is a 5'8", so pretty okay, vision level stat line. On reveal, move the highest power enemy card here away. If you can't, destroy it with a rock. So I saw this effect and I wasn't 100% sure how I was supposed to feel about it, because on the one end, this immediately gives me Stegron vibes. This is the batted away from this location, but now there's that little extra to it that if you put in a condition where there isn't a way to knock it away, well, then it's even better. Now it's a destroy card of whatever it is. So on the one end, you have this Shang-Chi plus element to it, right? But Shang-Chi as a 4/3 is only targeting 10 plus power. Technically, Cannonball can hit anything. But are you using Cannonball as a turn 6 play if your opponent has that full board going into turn 6 and they're leaving one lane for their final play? In this current meta of Alioth being everywhere, it's a very, very dangerous thing to leave all of your plays available to only one lane at the final turn of the game. Additionally, similarly to Stegron, this is only going to target flipped over, also known as revealed, cards. I think that's incredibly important to note too, because Juggernaut exists, right? Juggernaut is the big one to move unrevealed cards. They fixed Spider-Man and changed that viability the same way, so I'm not sure 100% how this is really going to be the big epic move card that we want it to be, because also Arrow's out there, who's a 5'9", and her timing can bring cards to her location, but Cannonball technically is just knocking them away. So theory crafting for this one, it made it a little bit more difficult for me, because maybe there's an element where maybe chance comes into play. Maybe a card like, you think of Gambit, for example. Gambit can target any position on the battlefield, even if it's armored, and it can be targeted. So maybe that's how Cannonball worked. After getting confirmation from the devs, that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be Cannonball looking for a specific space to play into, and if it can't move it to that space, then it destroys it, even if another's available. So, for example, you have your Professor X down, and Cannonball tries to move a card into what would have been the Professor X lane, even though there's another lane with open spaces. It's not going to work like that. It's more like Spider-Man. Spider-Man looks for a space and moves to that targeted space if it's available. If Spider-Man can't move, Cannonball can't move a card. Think of it like that as the easiest way to decide what's going to happen. Now, worst case scenario, it can do absolutely nothing also. And that's where I really don't like Cannonball, to be completely honest. I'm not sure how this is going to be viable, because if you're trying to move something out of an armored lane, or that card is protected by Professor X or Kyara or even Wakanda, if all the other lanes are full and you go to move the card out, it doesn't transform the card into a rock, it tries to destroy. And if it can't destroy, it won't then be replaced by a rock. So, they use the video in the clip where you see the blob get destroyed because it can't move, and then it's turned into a rock. This is from the Marvel Snap channel. But if that was an armored lane, or that blob was protected by Kyara, nothing's going to happen, and Cannonball is a 5'8". So I'm a little on the fence about trying to figure out the viability of Cannonball, but I think I found some homes in which he actually will be quite good. He's coming here on a week where we are getting Kitty Pryde and Miss Marvel. And I want to call this out because I know a lot of people have talked about the Miss Marvel gate that happened this past week for those who didn't update the game but had access to the Miss Marvel variant. And then, well, later they updated it, so maybe they could actually get the Ghost Spider variant that they were supposed to get. On that one specific topic, away from Cannonball for a half a second here, things happen, life happens, everyone makes mistakes. Nobody's missing out on anything. We're all going to be okay. It wasn't a manipulative cause. It's not the end of the world. People make mistakes. Companies make mistakes. Everybody is involved on this one on both sides equally. But back to Cannonball for a second here. Being paired up with Kitty Pryde and Miss Marvel is a really, really tempting week, because if you don't have Kitty Pryde, but you did get the Season Pass Hope Summers, Kitty Pryde has a great synergy together with Hope Summers to continue those turn 5 and turn 6 plays to grow those cards a lot easier, because you always have a 1-drop in your hand to play down onto Hope Summers. And Miss Marvel is still one of the best cards in the game, because it's going to give you widespread power, 13 power, on a relatively easy condition. And Miss Marvel's going to make several appearances also in my deck lists, because big beefy cards like Cannonball, normally you're only going to have one of them on a side or one of them in play at a given time anyway. So Miss Marvel does have a pretty nice synergy going into the Cannonball decks. So where do we begin? We look at decks like Control. I think Control is going to be a relatively safe home for Cannonball, because it gives you another possibility of something to do. Thinking on the lines of what that Stegron did, if we're playing a Storm mechanic in here, Stegron gave you 2 options where you could move a card in or out depending on the power. Cannonball actually can utilize that Storm lane as a sacrifice lane if played appropriately. You can play Storm into a lane all by itself and leave it alone, let the board clog up a little bit, and Cannonball can deflect that big card into the Storm lane so you can steal that lane back. This type of strategy is why I have Ghost in here on this style of deck, because you want to go second. You really want Cannonball to hit that big potential card on turn 6 to move a card over. I like that for this style of Control deck. So we are going to put in Professor X to help lock down a specific location. Miss Marvel makes an appearance here also with Daredevil, because Daredevil gives us some flexibility of knowing exactly where Professor X needs to go. Do you need to use Valkyrie early, or can you Cannonball a card depending on the priority on turn 5? All of that put together makes this a little bit more exciting. I like the idea of Valkyrie in this deck in particular as a control element, because we are seeing the rise of Valkyrie in general right now, from Mockingbird last week with the rise of Patriot decks and Zoo decks. So she's getting a little bit more love. I think she deserves a place in this type of cannon control. But if you want to spin into that Stegron line, we take a slight variation here. This is just move and control. I'm putting in Silk, and this is playing that Storm a little differently, where now you're trying to win the Storm lane rather than use the Storm lane as a sacrificial lamb. Now we're taking that Silk and letting it bounce into there. We're taking that Miss Marvel, which we had in the last deck also, using it more as a win condition for the Storm lane, looking at that Stegron to move it on over, and now we're putting in the combination of Daredevil with Hobgoblin to clog up a lane additionally, so you could go clogged lane into Cannonball and know where your cards are going to, your opponent's cards, are going to move. We are going to play Dr. Doom into this lane as well, and of course, everyone's favorite Goliath, because that turn 6 should be secured. And you don't need Goliath necessarily in this deck, but on turn 6, it's a great insurance clause to have if you've already gained your priority with Professor X. But of course, Ms. Marvel and Dr. Doom is probably one of the best duos in the game, so putting it into this type of movable control deck is probably going to be pretty sufficient. Spinning into a different direction here with Cannonball, I wanted to look at the destroying element of what he does. And it got me down the path of looking at destroying your opponent's cards as a different type of destroy deck. So I threw together a different type. We've got Elektra, Yondu, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, Gladiator, Shang-Chi, Lady Deathstrike. All of these cards are destroying cards on the other side of the battlefield, therefore ramping up a null. Now, Cannonball is in here in 2 different directions. 1, more as a control element, but 2, if your opponent is clogging, well then Cannonball becomes a destroy card for null. So null is being played without really having to destroy almost anything on your side of the battlefield, even though it could be targeting, via Lady Deathstrike. You could target your own Grandmaster or Elektra or Yondu, get a little bit of power, but you kind of want to leave that on the board. Looking for different ways for Cannonball to be utilized outside of essentially moving a card, where I do think that's his biggest strength, leads us down the path of nice deck you got there. But overall, that move element is where I do think Cannonball is going to be strongest. And I think moving your opponent's cards is very strong. We've seen the rise and fall of Arrow regularly, so let's lean into that with Cannonball by playing a deck that allows your opponent very little agency over where their cards actually end up at the very end of the game. We're putting together a move deck like this, where you've got your Craven and your Kingpin as your two rampable options, where obviously Craven ramps on your side and Kingpin ramps down the opposite side. But they're easy cards that you can play on down on turn 2 and then start moving cards all around. You've got Polaris and Spider-Man on turn 3. You've got Hercules to do a double bouncing effect on turn 4, where you can bring a card into, let's say, that Craven Hercules lane and then bounce it out because of Hercules into the Kingpin lane. There's a lot of control we can have with that, and Magneto's one of the strongest cards in the game right now. So I think a move deck combination that has some rampability and just general good stats. Silk is a 5-cost, Polaris is a 5-cost, Spider-Man's a 5-cost, Miles Morales, who's going to be incredibly cheap regularly as a 1/5, is a 5-cost. Everything here minus Magneto should be able to stay also under Shang-Chi range. So I like the targetability of this type of move deck, and Cannonball seems to fit pretty well within it. But what about that rock that it could be turned into? Could we take advantage of that being in the same mindset of like a Shadow King? Because a Shadow King is destroying all the power, where Blob was, let's say, a 6-2, and then it went to 6-17. Sorry, 6-0, it went to 6-17, and now it's a 6-0 again. Well, now we have that rock on the other side. Let's really lean into that and go into a toxic element. And I took what's rising as a combination of a toxic style deck, because Debris is incredibly valuable last week in Mockingbird, and this week, I think, with the same kind of toxicity synergy by looking at Man-Thing, looking at Typhoid Mary to be able to fire over those rocks via Annihilus and then Luke Cage on turn 6. I wanted to have some flexibility. So Sarah in this deck makes an appearance because we have the idea of looking at Annihilus plus Luke Cage on turn 6, or Cannonball even to get a final big move on turn 6, plus a Debris for some cloggage, doing that prior, and then try to move the Cannonball card, but oh no, everything is clogged because Debris clogged everything. There's a couple of different ways that we can use that hood package that we get with Sentry and Annihilus and embellish it further with an Affliction deck. And I think Luke Cage, who's been in and out of the meta in different forms, hasn't seen a lot of play recently, so let's kind of lean into that and use it to our advantage by playing Toxic Balls. YEET is another deck. Now, I wanted to do something that just really annoys your opponent. So I looked at how can we annoy the opponent as much as possible. Let's play a Ronin deck, because it seems to be one of the most frustrating decks to go up against for really unknown reasons, but I took a different spin on it. I took that Annihilus package, that trio of Hood, Sentry, Annihilus, and built it into this with Cannonball. So now you get to pick your own path. You can play it as a straight up Ronin deck, you can play it as a straight up Annihilus package, or you can use that Cannonball to really interfere with your opponent because you've already been putting down some really annoying cards. You've been putting down your Master Mold so they're getting stuck with all these sentries. You've been playing down that Scorpion so everything's already reducing in their hand. You've been clogging them up with Debris, and I'm putting the Season Pass Hope Summers into this deck because I love the idea of Hope Summers on 3, Sentry on 4, Doctor Doom on 5, and then all of, as I smack my mic, all of your clogging cards all over the place on turn 6 because you have 7 power to work with. You have your Debris, you have your Master Mold, you have your Scorpion, you have a bunch of different cards, and similar to what we talked about with the Sarah synergy, you could then still capitalize even further with it using Cannonball to ruin that card because you've been giving them absolute crap. So let's take an annoying deck and just simply call it YEET. Now the big question is, do I think you should use your resources on Cannonball? If you're a completionist, this topic is irrelevant to you because you're going to get Cannonball. However, how are you going to get it? Is it worth Spotlight Keys or Collector's Tokens? Collector's Tokens, I think, should be completely removed from the conversation. I don't see Cannonball having that much value in the sense of he's worth using that very precious resource versus a more attainable resource like Spotlight Keys. As always, only open up cards if you have 4 Spotlight Keys. In Cannonball, if you're sitting on 4, even after this past week with Mockingbird, where I do think that you should have used your keys more towards Mockingbird than towards Cannonball. We'll talk about War Machine next week. I think that Cannonball is one that is easy to pass on. I think it's easy to skip Cannonball and just say, he's a cool, fun, unique, niche card, but he's not necessarily the card that you should look to use your resources on. I think he's going to make for some fun YouTube clips. He's going to make for some wild turn 6 moments, but I don't see him as a game-breaking card because of Clog not necessarily being always present, because Zoo isn't always present. Now, with the rise of Thanos decks leaning more towards this use the stones method versus the lockjaw method, Cannonball might have a little bit of value in the very current meta. But post 2-3 weeks from now, I really don't see a lot of value coming from Cannonball quite yet. And even looking into the future, I don't see that onto the board. So I do think that this is a week where Cannonball is a card that you watch, you enjoy, you occasionally interact with, but you also leave grayed out in your collection. Cannonball is going to be a fun and unique card, and if you like that, go ahead and get it. But me personally, if I had to say, if you've got either 6,000 collector's tokens or 4 spotlights to get him, and you're not sure if you should use him or not use those resources or not, I'm going to tell you, don't. Let's skip on the Cannonball week and we'll move on. Now, on our channel, we are going to be unlocking Cannonball, so if you want to see that gameplay, come join us down on Twitch. I have a feeling there will probably be some epic sax parties, there will be lots of dancing, there will be lots of clips, and whatever we make from Cannonball, we're going to be testing live on stream. I hope you're there. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much, everyone.